Hey, Dan Harper here. I am out in Ste.Agathe today on my way to Morris because I had water in my basement last week. What does that have to do with anything? Well, I realized that I had just a small incident of stress in my house. I had just an 8-foot by 8-foot space in the basement on the carpet that had a bunch of water on it. I had water coming in from a couple other areas, but it wasn't that bad. But I have decided to come out of the city today to check out what's going on with the flooding around Manitoba. And both Ste.Agathe and Morris are kind of in the middle of it. I realized that I had a small amount of stress with just a little bit of water in my basement. So imagine what it's like if you have a whole city, a whole community, a whole, if your house is completely flooded. Imagine how that feels. And I can't because I only had a small amount of stress from the issue that I had. So I wanted to come out and see firsthand what it's like, what it looks like, visually at least, to have a flooded community. Before I get right into all this great footage, please be sure to like the video if you do actually like it. And also be sure to subscribe, as I'm trying to build my channel right now and have lots of other great Winnipeg and Manitoba footage and stories coming up. So, although there are places inside Winnipeg with some overland flooding due to bodies of water like retention ponds just getting too much water and then overflowing, and others right on the river that have water creeping right up to their houses, which obviously is terrible, I think it's also at a whole nother level to be completely surrounded by water, like the island of Morris, as I've called it here. This is terrible because you could have multiple houses that can only leave their properties by boat, and you might also have neighbors' land, farming land, completely wiped out by water. When I left Winnipeg going out of the city down Highway 75, there were only a handful of fields that had a good amount of water in them, and although that's definitely a bad situation for the farmers who might not be able to plant in good time or at all this year, it wasn't until I got to Ste.Agathe when I saw larger areas and properties really affected by the flooding. Some people were surrounded completely by water, but others were actually totally dry. But from these different areas, I learned that flooding can affect people completely differently. It's almost like a tornado where you might have one property, one house right beside each other, and one is completely flooded out and the other one's totally dry. You might have an area on one side of the highway that's flooded, but again, on the other side, it's dry or dryish. The flood season must be terribly stressful for people in these areas on an almost annual basis. So I'm happy to see towns like Morris who have an incredible ring dike system. But again, that doesn't help the countless people who have properties who aren't covered by that. The ring dike system in Morris is really smart. They have a permanent ring around the town, which I've heard was installed shortly after the flood of the century in 1997. They simply have to fill in the holes around the town, which there's about 7 of them for roads and rail systems, and then the town's well protected. When I was on site, I actually talked to one of the operators who was working on filling in the system, and it's cool because he was a local guy from Morris, and he mentioned that the province surveys the land for them, which tells them how high it will need to be, and he was going to have to still add about another 2 feet or 3 feet in some areas, and it was already at about 10 feet tall. The only road now available in or out of Morris is Highway 23 East. The west side is filled in. The closure of Highway 75 could also delay or suspend some trucks getting up from the US. What's really interesting is I had several messages from people who live inside Morris who had no idea how bad it was until they saw my photos. And even though that's the main reason I got out to do this, to show people and even just myself what flooding really looks like and how it affects people, it still actually blew me away that people from inside the community had no idea how far-reaching the flooding was. But again, that's the power of a good aerial image or video. It can really show people visually from a different angle what it looks like. couple people in the comments have asked what can be done about this sort of thing, and unfortunately in Manitoba, flooding is an annual occurrence that really can't have too much done about it because you can simply only make rain dikes so large. So unfortunately, every handful of years we go through the same thing where people have to stress out like this, sandbag homes, and just try and do their best to protect their property, their space, their farmlands, in order to get through this part of the season. Again, my thoughts go out to everybody who's affected by the flooding. I hope you're doing well, and I hope this is a short flood season for you, and that it doesn't happen for many, many more years to come in such a big way. Again, thanks for watching, and please don't forget to like and subscribe.